I mean, a lot of people when they're starting off, to some extent, okay, they imitate other people's work. You know, the great storytellers, people like Bill Shakespeare, people like Woody Allen, you know, or Kurosawa, and such and such. And if you don't know who to imitate, hey, or follow the patterns of, you know, you probably better go with the best. But if you're in a position where you're like, hey, wait a minute, you know, I don't have to imitate any of these guys. I can be a cut above all of them. You know, that was the position Stanley Kubrick was in. He borrowed very rarely from other storytellers or other filmmakers. You know, he was his own inspiration. It's funny because one of the few people he ever borrowed from was Doug Trumbull, who he worked with on 2001, where he saw Silent Running. And at first he didn't like the movie that much. He walked out of the premiere, but later he saw it on TV and he really liked the film. And when he did The Shining, he borrowed heavily from Silent Running in the fact that he had long scenes, like in Silent Running, of people saying nothing and just walking around these big confined spaces to get a feeling of isolationism and cabin fever and going stir crazy. You know, but for the most part, Kubrick was an innovator. He borrowed very little from other people, and hey, everyone borrowed from him. You know, that's where you want to be.
All right, number 13 on the checklist. This is the Great Writers Workshop checklist. Great Storytellers, I'm sorry. The Great Storytellers checklist. Why does Writers Workshop come to mind? I don't know, because I live in Iowa City, the literary capital of the world. Yeah. Now on number 13, you have to ask yourself on this checklist, does it come across real, not necessarily scientifically real, but emotionally real? Expand.
Yeah, well, you look at a film like Silent Running, where they took great liberties with science to bend them and even completely break them in order to tell a story. Mm-hmm. So, but the essence of the story was, this is a Greek tragedy set in outer space. This is about a man who's trying to save the last plants and forests.
Right.
And this is his goal to do this. And you can see how his character would sacrifice everything in order to save these last plants and forests because he has a love of nature. And that comes across as a real person. That comes across as a real story. But the science in it was really quite bad in that movie. But it's like I try to explain to people, people don't care about science, people care about other people. And when they were putting it together, they were arguing the fact that, look, what about Aesop's fables? You have lizards that are talking in these stories. Well, the lizards talk in real life? No, they don't. But you look at the Greek, some of the Greek stories of where the man took wax and feathers and stuck the wax and the feathers in his arms and started flying towards the sun. He got too close to the sun, the wax melted, and he fell to his death. The moral of the story was that there are limits to things. And if you go beyond those limits, you can die, and there can be consequences, and very bad consequences for that. Now, can you put wax on your arms and put feathers in them and fly to the sun? No, you can't. That's not scientifically correct. That's not real in that sense, but it's real in the sense that there are limits to things, and you need to know what those limits are. That's right. The distinction.
Right. Number 14 here. Give your characters a challenge for them, and then let them work out of it. Yeah. That's on the checklist. Yeah. So it's a challenge, and let's see how they can work themselves out of just like life. Life gives you challenges.
Yeah, and you need to do that in your story as well, and that's how. And we can learn from our characters working through these challenges and trials that they experience in this story. An example of that, one of my favorite films, the remake with Russell Crowe, 3:10 to Yuma, where at the end of the film, this guy, played by Christian Bale, he's given a very bad choice. His choice is, okay, he can keep his promise and take Ben Wade to the train station to get on the 3:10 to Yuma to go to prison. But if he keeps his promise to that, he will probably end up dead. He probably won't even be successful. But yet he still feels that he needs to do this for a wide variety of reasons. And one of the reasons he feels he needs to do it because his kids look down on him as not a real man. And he wants to show them this is what a real man is. A real man is someone who will stand by his principles and his convictions regardless of the consequences. That, to me, that's a powerful idea. That's a powerful story. And that's why I list it as that and Cape Fear is the two best remakes of all time, where they took a film that wasn't that good to begin with, and they made it into a masterpiece. The original Cape Fear I thought was very lightweight, melodramatic. So was the original 3:10 to Yuma. And they took both of these stories and they turned them into masterpieces because they really developed the issues in these stories well beyond what the original storytellers had.
Right, and this is the number 15 here, and this has to do with the hero. What issue does my hero have to struggle with? How is my hero's heart in conflict with itself? Well, explain that one, the hero thing.
Well, you really need, that's what drama is having a character who has their own heart in conflict with itself. Hamlet's an example of that. Hamlet, through much of the play, is just trying to figure out what he should do. He doesn't even know what he should do in this situation. He's been handed this task where his father wants him to avenge his murderer, who's his own uncle, and his uncle who's married to his mother and is now the king. And he's just a kid, struggling with this issue. That is what great drama is, where you don't have a hero who has, you look at like Dick Tracy, there's no real conflict in his heart in the decisions that he makes. These are the bad guys. Here's my Tommy gun. Ba 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 ba. There's no issue he's really struggling with there, and he has no sense of remorse after he's gunned them down. That isn't that good of a story, but it is. But a character like Freeman Lowell in Silent Running, he has to choose between, okay, this is my choice. I can obey the law and obey the company's rules and sit on my butt and watch the entire ecosystem destroyed forever. Or I can kill my crewmates and hijack the ship, and I have a chance maybe somehow of saving the last forest, and wildlife. And this is a tough choice, But that's you see him struggling with that in the story, where the first 30 minutes of the movie is just him dealing with that issue. And even though he says very little about that issue, you can see his character struggling with it in Bruce Stern's performance.